Thank you all for being here. Secretary Kerry, you mentioned a Washington Post story related to Israelis who know what they're talking about. I'd like to point out to you, that wasn't even in the newspaper. That was a blog post. And it was written by someone who's been described as a left-wing political activist. And if I have to choose between them and the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I'm going to stand with the Prime Minister of Israel. But if you want to start talking about the newspaper, let's take a look at yesterday's New York Times, a real news story. Some experts question verification process in Iran accord. First paragraph, the Obama administration's claim that the Iran nuclear accord provides for airtight verification procedures is coming under challenge from nuclear experts with long experience in monitoring Tehran's program. Several experts, including a former high-ranking official at the IAEA, said a provision that gives Iran up to 24 days to grant access to inspectors might enable it to escape detection. Quote, a 24-day adjudicated timeline reduces detection probabilities exactly where the system is weakest, detecting undeclared facilities and materials. So I would just say to all three of you, I find it very telling and very disturbing that the President of the United States decided to go to the United Nations on Monday before coming to the American people. I think the American people have a right to have their voices heard. We expect to hear from them in August as we head home and listen in town hall meetings across the country. I think Congress has the right and the responsibility to provide oversight. Secretary Kerry, our nation's highest military commanders have very clearly warned the President, have warned you, have warned Congress that lifting the arms embargo and current restrictions on ballistic missile technologies to Iran would be wrong. On July 7th this year, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was unequivocal. He said, under no circumstances should we relieve pressure on Iran relative to ballistic missile capabilities and arms trafficking. Under no circumstances. That's what he said. Defense Secretary Ash Carter also testified about Iran. He said, we want them to continue to be isolated as a military and limited in terms of the kinds of equipment and materials they're able to get. And just 7 days later, you did the complete opposite of what our military advisors very clearly warned against. You disregarded the views and the advice of our top military commanders, negotiated away these important restrictions on Iran, getting deadly military technologies. U.S. negotiators, I believe, capitulated, surrendered, agreed to lift the arms embargo to get this deal. And Russia, I must point out, can gain about $7 billion from arms sales to Iran. This administration repeatedly ignores the advice of our military leaders when it comes to important national security decisions. The administration ignored General Odierno's recommendations to keep U.S. troops in Iraq after 2011. President Obama withdrew all of the troops. The administration ignored Secretary Leon Panetta's, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Martin Dempsey's recommendations to arm vetted Syrian rebels. President Obama refused. The administration is now coming to Congress once again, ignoring the advice and recommendations of our military leaders. This time it's about Iran. Mr. Secretary, how can you justify ignoring this advice and the judgment of military commanders responsible for securing the safety of the American people?
Well, Senator, we didn't. I work with Marty Dempsey. I have great respect for him. We heard what he said very clearly, and we respect what he said, which is why we have the 8 years and why we have the 5 years. In fact, we held out very, very strongly to keep them. And the fact is, Senator, during those 5 years and those 8 years, we have all the options available to us in the world to strengthen or find other means or deal with those very issues. So they're not gone. They're there. We respected his advice. Moreover, we have additional capacities to be able to deal with missiles. We have the lethal military equipment sanctions provision in the Foreign Assistance Act. We have the 1996 Iran Sanctions Act. We have the Iran-Iraq Arms Non-Proliferation Act. We have, those are unilateral tools, by the way. We have a bunch of multilateral tools, a Proliferation Security Initiative with 100 countries, which works to help limit Iranian missile related imports and exports. We have the Missile Control Technology Regime. which does a lot to prevent the growth of any missile capacity. So, you know, there are many things we will continue to do, but it didn't go away. We actually kept it. And we kept it notwithstanding the fact that 3 out of 7 of the negotiating parties wanted to get rid of it altogether. We kept it. Next thing, on the UN. You know, we fought for the prerogatives of the Congress. But you know, 6 of the 7 countries we were negotiating with are not beholden to the United States Congress. If their parliaments passed something and said, you got to do this or that, and you were being told what to do, you'd be pretty furious. They were negotiating under the United Nations. And their attitude was, we finished negotiation, we ought to be able to conclude our agreement and put it before the UN. And we said, wait a minute, our Congress needs to be able to review this. So we got them to accept a 90-day provision in the agreement for non-implementation. They are respecting our desire, and we're respecting your desire. For 90 days, there's no implementation of this. If they had their way, they'd be implementing it now, immediately. But they're not. So I respectfully suggest that we have to have a balancing here of interests and equities. I think we have preserved the prerogative of Congress. The same consequences will apply if you refuse to do this deal with the UN vote as without it. Same consequences. And none of us have sat here and thrown the UN vote at you. We're simply saying this is a multilateral agreement that's been negotiated by 7 countries. I'd say the same thing if I was here without the UN vote.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Secretary Lew mentioned that you said a deal our partners believe is a good one, and Secretary Kerry, you had talked about the P5+1, and you said, and they're not dumb. Well, I agree with that. They're not dumb. And it makes me, though, wonder if Russia truly is our partner in this. We pressed the reset button. We saw how that failed. We see Putin's belligerents around the world. I believe Russia and Iran teamed up against the United States during these negotiations.
Actually, the Iranians were furious at the Russians on any number of accounts. The Russians, they felt, were not cooperative with them and didn't help them. You're exactly wrong.
Well, that's the time will judge us on all of that. But just coming back from Ukraine and seeing what's happening, as well as from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, I can see the belligerence and the aggression of Russia, and I see it in this agreement. And it's not because they are our partners or were our partners or are going to be our partners in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.